welcome back. I think Emerson's gonna join. Hopefully you guys all had a nice weekend. Sorry for some of you who joined in on Friday where I was not here. I was feeling a little ill, as I was explaining in my other video. I felt a little bad stomach ache the night before and I didn't get any sleep, and I had a rough time waking up in the morning. So um, yes, I'm here now and I feel much better. And are you ready? Jars of Souls. We're talking about how there were a baker there. There's like all these different people. There's a knight in the jars, and there's a king in the jars, and then there's a man with a thing. I don't know. Where's Emerson? He probably knows who all these people are. I don't know who they are because I have never read this chapter yet. Uh, well, let's see who they are. Only one way to find out, right? Is to read. Um, so I'm just gonna go back a little, like I always do, just so I could refresh our memory. Everyone in the room was as pale as Snow White. Oh, the lovely Enchantress came into the room, huh? Everyone in the room was pale white. The twins froze inside Red's gown with their hearts broken. Why was their hearts broken? Do you guys remember? I'm going to take you to the top of the page where we'll find out. What will the rest of you do now? What would you rest of you do now that I have Fairy Godmother's soul? So that's why the kids are a little sad, because the Enchantress, or Esmia, um, stole the soul of grandmother. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? What would you do? You're like hiding under the dress, under, somebody's dress, and suddenly you see your grandmother's soul being sucked into a jar. I'd freak out. I don't know how those twins actually stayed quiet in there, but I would just like run out of that dress or something, right? And attack her. Probably take our souls too, but we'll see. Thank you, Emerson. Emerson's always encouraging me. All right, chapter 13. Jars of Souls. Deep in the heart of the dwarf forest, there were trees and shrubbery, and shrubbery grew the thickest. Where the trees and shrubbery grew the thickest was a small hut unseen by all who passed it. A witch named Hagatha had lived in the hut many years ago, strategically planted a wall of thorn bushes around her home, making it virtually impossible to find. And although the witch was long dead, the hut had more residents now than ever before. The Enchantress had turned the hut into her new home following the restoration of her powers, and it looked the same on the outside, with only 2 windows and a hay roof, but it had been charmed to become a spacious manor the moment someone walked through the door. Hold on, let me remove this book. Actually, I'll put it right here. The Enchantress had turned the hut into her new home following the restoration of her powers. It still looked the same on the outside, with only 2 windows and a hay roof. Oh, sorry, I'm reading this paragraph again. But it had been charmed to become a spacious manor the moment someone walked through the door. It had large rooms with high ceilings and black stone walls. A wide fireplace was made of amethyst stones, within which a fire of purple flames burned a collection of skulls like firewood. The furniture was made of exotic porcupine and salamander animal skins. Ew. A chandelier made of various species' teeth hung from the ceiling but gave no light. It was usually a quiet place, but tonight the piercing cries of a child echoed through its halls. Please be quiet, little princess, said Rumpelstiltskin. Princess Hope was more than half his size, but he still rocked the 1-year-old back and forth, trying to soothe her. Mama, the princess cried, Mama. You can't have your mama, I'm afraid, Rumpelstiltskin told the child, and she bawled harder than before. She'd been crying for more than a day, said Charlotte Bailey from the back of the room. Could you please just give her to me? The twins' mother was imprisoned in a large... The twins' mother was imprisoned in a large birdcage that swung a few feet above the ground. Not fun being in a birdcage. Emerson, what does that mean? What did you type? Hold on, excuse me. I don't know what that means. I'm a nurse. It's wait, what makes you think you can get her to stop crying? Rumpelstiltskin said. He was exhausted from having to care for the child the last day. I'm a nurse. It's what I do, she said. Charlotte was still dressed in her nursing scrubs. She had just finished a shift at the children's hospital when a mysterious blanket of light wrapped around her and transported her into the fairy tale world. It didn't take long for Charlotte to realize that the enchantress who had summoned her there was after her daughter, and so for Alex's protection, Charlotte had pretended to be her daughter. So remember that? So Charlotte is pretending to be Alex right now. Oh no, so if they catch Alex, who are they going to think Alex is? Ooh, this story's going to get quite interesting. It's going to get very confusing. Oh, yes, so would I. Our friend Emerson here says he would faint if he sees someone's soul. Yeah, kind of freaky, right? Creepy. It didn't appear that Princess Hope would calm down anytime soon. Against his better judgment, Rumpelstiltskin handed the young princess to Charlotte through the bars of the cage. He didn't care how angry Esmea would be to find the child with the other prisoner. He just wanted the crying to stop. Rumpelstiltskin had never been good with kids. There, there, baby girl, Charlotte said and stroked Hope's auburn curls. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. Slowly but surely, Princess Hope calmed down in Charlotte's maternal embrace, sleeping for the first time since she had been taken. All the young princesses needed, all the young all the young princess needed was a mother's touch. Rumpelstiltskin was so relieved to have silence. He could have slept for 3 days if he were allowed. Charlotte studied the little man. Nothing about him was malicious like his master. He seemed like such a gentle and kind man. So you're Rumpelstiltskin? She asked him. Yes, he said with a remorseful shrug, ashamed of the reputation that came with his name. Did you really spin hay into gold for the maiden, like the story says? Charlotte asked. That I did, Rumpelstiltskin admitted. And did you really try to take her firstborn away from her? Charlotte said, finding it hard to believe. Rumpelstiltskin let out a heavy sigh. That's what Esmea wanted me to do, he said, but I couldn't go through with it. I told the maiden, well, she was a queen by that point, that I would dismiss her end of the bargain if she could guess my name. And she did, if I recall, Charlotte said. It'd been a while since she heard the story. I made sure she did, Rumpelstiltskin confessed. I caught one of her soldiers following me. I danced around a fire, proclaiming my name to the whole forest as loud as I could. So you intentionally made it easy for her, she said. That was very kind of you. A tiny smile grew on Rumpelstiltskin's face, but it quickly faded. I thought so too, he said. Unfortunately, no one will ever know that part of the story. People are quick to judge, Charlotte said, and I'm no exception. I never wondered why you did all those things. My mind was just made up that you were a villain? Rumpelstiltskin asked, unfazed. It was what he had been known as the majority of his life. Yes, a villain, Charlotte admitted. Rumpelstiltskin was growing very comfortable talking to Charlotte, too comfortable. Had he not been so tired, he might have kept his guard up, but he couldn't deny there was something trustworthy about Charlotte. They were both good people stuck in a bad situation. How did someone like you get mixed up with someone like her? Charlotte asked, shaking her head. Because I had the misfortune of being born a dreamer, he said sadly. A dwarf is born with one option: become a miner. A life spent in dark tunnels under the ground was never what I wanted for myself. I always loved being outside with plants and animals. I used to daydream about being a shepherd or a farmer. My brothers used to scold me day and night for it. They said being a miner was an honor and that I was lucky. Then one day Esmea came to me with the offer to be her apprentice. Rumpelstiltskin rubbed his eyes and took a seat on a porcupine skin chair, too fatigued to mind the needles poking him. It's funny, he said. I don't think twice about saying yes, but I've regretted it every day of my life. Charlotte couldn't help but feel sorry for him. She realized there were three prisoners under this roof. Anyone would have said yes if they were in your shoes, she said. Back then, perhaps, Rumpelstiltskin agreed, but now no one would ever admit to it. A strong breeze blew through the room. Why is the child with her? Said a booming voice that made Charlotte and Rumpelstiltskin jump. Esme had suddenly appeared. The enchantress seemed tired. Her posture wasn't quite as straight, and her hair didn't flow as freely as it had before. Esme had been planning this night for a long time, and it had ended the way she wanted. Rumpelstiltskin immediately hopped off the chair. Princess Hope wouldn't stop crying, he said, and I wanted you to have a silent home to return to. Esme scowled at Charlotte, and she held on to the princess even tighter. The enchantress moved toward the cage and peered in at them through the bars like a praying hawk. You're awfully good with children, aren't you? Esme said suspiciously. I told you I'm a nurse. It's my job, Charlotte said, shifting uncomfortably under the enchantress's gaze. I take care of sick children at a hospital. Esme raised an eyebrow. Interesting, she said. I never expected the fairy godmother's granddaughter to be so old. Well, not all of us have magic holding us up, Charlotte retorted. You've got spirit, I'll give you that, Esme said. Perhaps this will humble you. Esme placed the glass jar she had been carrying on a small table close to Charlotte's cage. Charlotte was horrified to see a miniature ghostly version of the fairy godmother trapped inside. That's my grandmother, Charlotte said, almost forgetting that she was still pretending to be her own daughter. What have you done to her? A smile appeared on Esme's face, watching the satisfaction in her eyes. I captured her soul, she said. The thought almost made Charlotte sick. She had no idea such a thing was possible, even in the fairy tale world. What do you want with her soul? Charlotte asked. It's a bit of a hobby of mine, actually, Esme said, and walked to her fireplace. Displayed proudly on the mantel were 5 other turquoise jars, each containing a ghostly substance. You're a soul collector? Charlotte asked. Is it to make up for being soulless? What a clever play on words, Esme said mockingly. You know that phrase, forgive and forget? Well, I always disagreed with it. I found it impossible, actually. People would do me wrong and then forget about me, as if their actions didn't matter because I didn't matter. How was I supposed to forgive people like that? Oh, welcome. There's 3 people in here. I'm not sure who it is, but if you want to type in the chat room, I can give you a little shout out and say hi. I could chat with you a little bit. Oh, did I lose my place? Yes. So you imprisoned their souls instead of forgiving, Charlotte said. Precisely, Esme said. I found taking away their life force to be much more appealing than simply forgiving. To forgive would be to allow them to continue living their lives free of consequence. But by taking their souls and preventing them from all future happiness, I could heal and find peace. Charlotte couldn't believe what she was hearing. Do you honestly expect anyone to sympathize with that? Charlotte asked her. Esme stared into the fire at the burning skulls, almost in a trance. I don't want the world to understand. I want it to grovel, she said. The confession made Charlotte's heart even heavier. She wondered if she would ever escape the clutches of a person who thought like this. But thinking about her children, Bob, and the life she had stolen from gave Charlotte the strength to survive the Enchantress's imprisonment. I almost forgot. Bob was supposed to propose to her, right, that day that she was supposed to come home. I find it hard to believe that the fairy godmother who is known for her generosity would harm you in any way, Charlotte said. Sometimes help can be just as destructive as harm, Esme said, but I imagine someone who helps for a profession couldn't comprehend that. Enlighten me, Charlotte challenged. The enchantress raised her eyebrows. Ooh, I'm curious to hear about this. The fairy godmother found me in the other world when I was just a girl, as Mia said. I was alone, orphaned, and starving. She brought me here to live with the fairies in the fairy kingdom. She gave me a home, taught me to use magic in a productive manner, and in time trained me to become one of the greatest fairies in the kingdom. Charlotte shook her head as though she had misunderstood. That doesn't sound like something to begrudge, she said. Success can scar you as much as failure, as Mia continued. The more I surpassed the fairies with my talents, the more they resented me. Fairies are incredibly jealous creatures, although no one ever talks about it because it would tamper with their image. When the fairy godmother declared me her protege, all the other fairies distanced themselves from me. I had never asked for the attention, but they targeted their frustrations on me as if I had done something to personally offend them. Every spell I cast and every enchantment I performed was subject to an unjustified amount of criticism. Even though I was accomplishing something, sorry, even though I was accomplishing incredible things left and right, my achievements were ignored because of the special treatment I received. I became ashamed of my gifts, and mediocrity became my new goal. Wanting to be in the same league as the others, lowering my standards only aggravated them more, and by the time I reached adolescence, I was alone and starving again, but this time for affection. The enchantress gestured to the jars and displayed on her mantle. Which brings us to these, she said. Now, this section of the story is very close to my heart, you see, because inside the jars on my mantle are the souls of 5 men who unwisely broke it. One man who never loved me, one man who couldn't love me, one man who loved me too much, one man who loved me in secret, and one man who didn't love me enough. Esmia picked up the jar farthest to the left and looked inside it. A figure of a young man wearing an apron appeared in the ghostly substance inside. The baker was my first love, the enchantress said. He lived in a small village in the charming kingdom and worked in his family's bakery. He was the first person besides the fairy godmother to ever ask me if I was having a good day. I was so young and vulnerable. All it took was a shared smile to make me fall madly in love with him. We became very close, and I confessed my deepest secrets and desires to him. I was positive our love would last forever. Unfortunately for me, I learned his attentions were anything but genuine. I had I had been the subject of a practical joke. The baker had pretended to have feelings for me only to report back to the village, to the other village youths everywhere, that I had confessed to him. He had been playing a game with my heart the whole time. I went back to the fairy kingdom in tears. I was hoping for some kind of sympathy from them, some sort of compassion, but instead they had just laughed at me. They were happy to see something topple from the pedestal I had never asked to be placed on. You see, I had broken an unwritten rule. Apparently, a person of privilege is never allowed to complain about anything. What do you guys think that means? A person of privilege is never allowed to complain about anything. Do you guys agree with that? What do you guys think? What do you think, Emerson? It says a person of privilege. So it means so I'm going to clarify a little bit, okay? So privilege means a person who's living better than somebody else. They could be richer, smarter, better, doing better at something, more skilled at something. So they're saying a person of privilege is never allowed to complain about anything. So let's say a rich person. Are they never allowed to complain about anything? Do you agree with that? What do you think? I'll give you some time to type. No? Yeah, everyone complains, right? Everyone should be allowed to complain. I agree. With no one to confide in and no shoulder to cry on, I ran into the forest and collapsed onto the roots of a tree. I lay there for hours and cried my heart out into its bark. That tree was the only thing that ever comforted me from the pain, and I visited that tree quite a bit over the years. Over time, I tried forgiving the baker, but it only angered me more. I returned to his bakery and demanded an apology. He refused, saying the whole thing had been a childish prank. So I cast a spell on a gingerbread man he was baking. It jumped up from the tray and ran away from him. It became quite the ordeal. The entire village chased after it with no success. There's a gingerbread story, huh? The baker and his family became the laughing stock of the village, and they lost their bakery, and it made me feel so much better. That's when I learned that taking the high road would never give me the same satisfaction as getting even. The enchantress set aside the baker's jar and moved on to the next. A man holding a hammer with a chain draped over his shoulder, appeared in the jar. Do you remember who that is? A man with a hammer. Do you remember, Emerson? It says it right there, right under it, though. You could cheat, huh? The locksmith was a troubled man, Esmia said and shook her head, a testament of his profession to his profession. He liked keeping his properties locked down, and I was no exception. I fell for him mostly out of convenience, needing something to repair my heart from the damage left by the baker. He was such a quiet man. He barely said a word to me. He never looked me in the eye, and when he touched me, it was rarely out of affection. He definitely left his mark on me, several actually, and like a fool, I stayed, thinking it might be the only type of love I would ever receive. When I finally told him I was leaving him, he didn't even blink. He had so many demons already, I didn't feel the need to cause him more distress when we parted. I felt more anger toward him than I did toward him for letting him harm me. I kept him as a reminder to never let myself sink to such pitiful depths again. Charlotte and Rumpelstiltskin looked sideways at each other. They couldn't believe the Enchantress was telling them so much, but Esmea had completely lost herself in a stroll through the most painful memories of her past. The trip down memory lane wasn't entirely for them, however. Telling her captives the stories of her former loves appeared to gradually rejuvenate her from her long night. She stood taller, and her hair flowed more vigorously above her. The purple flames in Esmea's fireplace grew even more as she reminisced. It was undeniable. The enchantress was fueled by the pain of her past. Esmea picked up the third jar in the center of the mantel. A man playing a pipe appeared in the cloudy substance. Who do you think that is? The musician was the lover I thought I had been waiting for, Esmea confessed. I was so taken by his charm, he constantly serenaded me with songs and sonnets. He was so eager to confess our love to the world, too eager. I soon realized that it wasn't me he was in love with. It was the idea of me. He wanted the world to know he was connected to the future fairy godmother, not Esmea. He was using me like a ladder. However, I stayed with him despite knowing his true intentions. Dreading the thought of being alone, I showered him with gifts, in particular, an infamous pipe he used to magically clear a town of rats. I had enchanted the pipe myself and had hoped it would equalize our statuses. I thought if I gave him something that made him feel as important as me, he would learn to love me for me and not my title. Sadly, the only thing that grew following his victory was his ego, and it led him to infidelity as easily as he had led the rats to the river. I transformed his new lover into an instrument so he could forever play her in the same way he had played with me. The enchantress picked the fourth jar on the mantel. Who do you think that is? She stared inside the soul of a man dressed from head to toe in armor. Oh, it was the knight, remember? Who do you think that is? The soldier was a very guarded man, Esmea said. He kept our relationship in total secret. It was refreshing to be with someone so private after the musician. Later, I discovered his discretion was not to protect me, but to protect himself. The soldier was ashamed of our relationship. He thought if word broke that he was courting a fairy, it would damage his career and he would never be promoted to general. I cast a spell on him that flattened his feet and stiffened his joints. He spent the rest of his days guarding the entrance to a kitchen and never received any promotion at all. The enchantress moved on to the final jar on the mantel. A handsome young man wearing robes and a crown appeared inside of it. Esmea looked at him differently than she had all the others. It was clearly the hardest memory to relive. The king hurt me more than anyone, the enchantress confessed. Unlike all the others, the king treated me with compassion, and the rest failed to. He was my best friend, and the only person who I felt loved me back. Perhaps that common kinship is what made me fall for him more than the others, and is why it still hurts to this day. However, he never loved me as much as I loved him. Friendship was the only thing he wanted from me. I visited every day, hoping he would change his mind. One day he caught me trying to give him a love potion. I had never seen him so angry. He shouted for the entire castle to hear that he would never love me the same way I loved him, even with all the love potions in the world. I lost my temper and I cursed the king to live as a hideous beast and turned him into the monster I thought he was. Eventually, he found a girl to love him despite his animalistic features, and my curse was broken. The story of Beauty and the Beast has been exaggerated over time, but the king never told a soul I was the one who cursed him. He was still a friend after everything I had done to him. The king's rejection was the final break to my heart could take. I thought if the king was incapable of loving me, then no one could. The fairy godmother says I changed over that period of time, and she's right. I represented happily ever after, but couldn't find a happily ever after for myself. Everywhere I went, I was expected to solve problems, but I couldn't salvage my own. I began hating the world I stood for. I hated the fairies. I hated the pathetic people they helped. I hated myself for being one of them. I stopped pretending I belonged among them. For the first time, I began to say and do what I wanted to, rather than what I was expected to. If the other fairies were going to condemn me regardless of what I did, I figured I might as well give them a valid reason to. When they replaced me on the Happily Ever After assembly and gave my seat to Emeralda, I can't say I was surprised. I was furious and hurt, but I knew the fairies had secretly been wanting for an excuse to take something away from me. Emeralda had never been as gifted as me, but she had always been so loved by everyone she met. The fairies knew appointing her would hurt me the most. I ran into the forest and found my trustworthy tree to cry into. I stayed and cried for days and days. I felt as if my soul had finally been crushed, as if my entire life had been a cruel experiment to see how much heartbreak I could withstand. When I finally dried my tears, I looked up at the tree. It was significantly taller than all the other trees in the forest. After all the tears I had shed over the years into its roots, the tree had surpassed all the others surrounding it. I was so ashamed of myself. I couldn't believe what I had let the world do to me. I cast a spell on the tree, causing it to curve and loop like a vine until it was the same height as the other trees, and the evidence of my heartache was gone. That's the moment that the fragile, heartbroken fairy inside of me died, and the enchantress was born. I decided from then on, if the world was going to speak of my name, it would be whispered in fear rather than mocked with envy. If the world was going to take all my joy from me, I would simply take away all the joy from the world. Esme had forgotten she wasn't alone. All the pain from her past was what had created the person she was today. So it was difficult for her to realign herself with the present. Let me see how many pages are left. 1, to... Oh, I could finish this chapter. Look at that. Everyone goes through heartache, Charlotte said. I've been through my own share of loss, but I got over it. I never plotted a ruthless revenge scheme or held the world responsible for it. Esmea jerked her head toward her. Really? She said angrily. Have you ever felt loneliness so strong that it hollowed your soul with every heartbeat? Have you ever hated the sun for rising and forcing another day of solitude upon you? I suppose not, Charlotte said. No one ever had trouble loving me. Rumpelstiltskin gasped at Charlotte's bold statement. Esmea was almost impressed by Charlotte's fearlessness. Careful, Esmea warned her. There's a thin line between bravery and stupidity. Charlotte turned away, unable to look at her anymore. Esmea placed the jar containing the king's soul back on the mantel. I shall retire for the night, she said. I know I make it look so effortless, but the world domination is exhausting. I'm going to rest a bit before continuing my attacks across the kingdoms. I want to be at my best when I cause the world's worst. Esmea headed toward her chambers for the night, but Rumpelstiltskin stopped her before she left the room. Esmea, Rumpelstiltskin asked, carefully filtering any judgment in his tone, are you sure you'll ever find peace? Even after taking over the world, are you certain you'll be satisfied? Charlotte turned back, interested to hear the answer. A malevolent smile appeared on the Enchantress's face. Silly Rumpy, Esmea said with a laugh. Who said I only wanted this world? Ah, I read that sentence wrong. I emphasized the wrong word. Who said I only wanted this world? There you go. And that's the end of the chapter. And tomorrow's chapter is called The Wand of Wonderment. That is what it's called. The Wand of Wonderment. All right, so I'll read this tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Thanks for staying for the whole thing, Emerson. That kind of encourages me when you're here the whole time because I'm not reading to myself then. Thank you for joining, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good day. Are you prepping for school? Are you ready for school? Are you ready to go back? Thank you. Are you ready to go back to school? Or ready for school to start because we can't go back, unfortunately? Are you ready to do homework online and go to online virtual classes, your Zoom calls like we used to do? I'm sure 5th grade is going to hold it a little bit differently than 4th grade. Bored, huh? Getting bored of this. Well, at least you get to see your friends, huh? Can't chit-chat with them, but there's no recess and lunch to go play with them, but at least you get to see them, huh? All right. I will see you tomorrow, okay? Bye, Emerson. And bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.